الله أكبر الله أكبر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده. الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده. ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وخليله وخير نبي أرسله الله إلى العالم كله بشيرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد صلاة وسلاما دائمين متلازمين إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله تعالى، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We seek His assistance, His guidance, and forgiveness. And we take refuge with Him from the evil within our souls and from the consequence of our misdeeds. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives guidance to, none can mislead. And whoever He misleads, none can guide. I bear witness that there's no one and nothing worthy of worship besides Allah. He is alone, He has no partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad, the son of Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, was a slave and messenger. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him peace and to extend to him our salutations on this blessed and special day. It says we ask him to grant peace to his family members, his companions, and all of those who follow in goodness and goodwill into the meeting and the reckoning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam is what we call one of the iconoclastic religions. Our Prophet ﷺ was the ultimate iconoclast. That is to say that Islam, when it comes to our understanding of Tawheed or monotheism, that we are members of a religion who places the objective of smashing the icons, smashing the idols in all of their forms at the forefront, or makes that the most important aspect of our teaching. That is to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Islam seeks to rid us from what it is attributed to some of our Salaf, our predecessors have said, from the worship of the slave to the worship of the creator of the slaves. And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in a number of verses what we call, or names of the people we can call the ultimate iconoclasts. And those men are referred to in the Quran as ulul azm, those who possess firm resolve, the possessors of firm resolve. In one verse in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ مِيثَاقَهُمْ وَمِنْكَ وَمِنْ نُوحٍ وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمَ. And when we took, and remember when we took the covenant from the prophets, and we took the covenant from you, Muhammad, and from Noah, and from Abraham, and from Moses, and from Jesus, alayhi salatu wasalam. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ وَمَا وَصَّيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى. We have legislated in or initiated in religion or as a path towards God the same thing that we have initiated with regard to Noah, and the same that we revealed to you, Muhammad, and the same that we advise Abraham, Moses, and Jesus with. And aqimu ad-dina wa la tatafarraqu fi, that you remain upright regarding this faith and you do not become dispersed therein. Kabura ala mushrikeen ma tad'uuhum ilayhi, and it weighs heavy and hard upon the idolaters what you call them to. Wallahu yahdi ilayhi man yasha. Wallahu yashtabi ilayhi man yasha wa yahdi ilayhi man yunib. But Allah, He selects for it those whomever He pleases, and He guides to it those who are who have repentful hearts. He guides to this path those who have repentful hearts. These 5 men, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Nuh alayhi salam, Isa, Ibrahim, and Musa, these 5 iconoclasts, and what we find is that what is similar in all of their lives was that one of the ultimate challenges they had to deal with was not only physical idolatry, but also the idolatry or the idolization of men. And they came to cause a disturbance, to disrupt the people's cognitive frameworks that they had. And so last week I began to speak about the story of Noah alayhi salam. And this is a very popular story right now. Of course, we know there's a movie out right now. There's some controversy related to that movie. And I want to return to a discussion of certain parts of Surah Nuh alayhi salam. So Nuh alayhi salam, this great prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of great patience as we know, who spent almost 1,000 years in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in preparation for this great flood by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would eventually purify those who had lived on the earth at that time in order to bring about a new generation. As if this serves as an example for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant when the angels asked them, will you place in the earth those who will spread corruption and spread blood, who will shed blood? وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ, while we will glorify you with praises and we will sanctify you. And then Allah responded to them, قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, I know what you don't know. And so of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that He would send pious generations and He would send prophets. But also He knew that there would come time and time again that He would purify those generations when things got too much out of hand. And this happened to be one of those moments in our history that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to purify a generation. And to the extent that it is said or believed by some that every single person who lives on the planet now actually are the offspring of Noah alayhi salam. It's not a very strong opinion, but it has been something shared by people in Christianity and Judaism in the past as well. However, there are those people, in spite of it not being very strong, but there are those people who believe that still today. At any rate, Nuh alayhi salam was faced with a similar type of situation that every generation typically is faced with, where we have regimes, powerful regimes, who have as a part of on their agenda, an agenda to subjugate the people, an agenda to place and divide people into different castes and classes in order to themselves exploit the economic situation and allow the others to vie for them, for those what is left over, the crumbs in society. And so corruption spreads in those type of situations. That murder, theft, among other things, is spread during the time of Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam. But what also was very apparent was idolatry was very openly practiced. And this is why when Nuh, in Surah Nuh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He quotes Nuh alayhi salam as saying وقال نوح ربي إنهم عصوني واتبعوا من لم يزده ماله وولده إلا خسارة. And Noah said, "O Lord, they have disobeyed me and they followed those whose wealth nor children will not be of any benefit to them. وَمَكَرُوا مَكْرًا كُبَّارًا." And they came up with a great plot, a great enormous plot. قَالُوا لَا تَذَرُنَّ آلِهَتَكُمْ. Do not, they said, don't give up. Don't throw off or cast off your gods. وَلَا تَذَرُنَّ وَدَّا وَلَا سُوَاعَ وَلَا يَهُوثَ وَيَعُوقَ وَنَسْرًا. Do not rid yourselves, do not disassociate yourselves from Wad and Suwa' and Yahuth and Ya'uq and Nasr. These 5 idols that they had worshipped. And there are different narrations about what these idols represented. That some versions of that, these five idols were shaped or fashioned to resemble 5 of the sons of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, who were very pious people. It said that Adam, he had given birth to 40 children. And amongst them who survived were these 5, and they were pious, and they themselves, or they were his grandchildren, and so they themselves were so pious that the people themselves, in order to remind themselves of their commitment or the obligation to remain committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they made statues, or Shaitan, and he enticed them to create these statues of them, telling them that, well, if you make these forms of these people, then you'll remember your obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by reflecting upon their piety. And so after a time, naturally, as usually is the case, the progeny forgets about that message. And they start to worship the idols themselves, believing there's something inherent in the things, those stones and those wooden idols that they created with their own hands, and believing that they have some sort of power to cause change in their lives, to bring harm or bring benefit to them. Right? And that's one story. Another version is that these idols were children of Noah. That they were children of Noah as well. So some say Adam, some say children of Noah, but at any rate, I'm sorry, not that they were children of Noah, but that these were children of Adam. Another version is simply that they were just some pious people who had existed between the coming of Adam alayhi salam and Nuh alayhi salam. Now, some of the view as well that these idols, each one of them had a particular form. That what took the form of a man to represent manly power. Suwa' was fashioned as a woman to represent womanly elegance. And Yahuz was fashioned into a lion to indicate courage, among other things. Ya'uq was fashioned to a horse to indicate swiftness and speed. And Nasr took the form of a bird, either a falcon, an eagle, or a vulture. At any rate, these particular the symbolism involved with them was also, by extension, a way to sort of worship these particular characteristics in people. And people today as well worship these type of characteristics. When we find them in people, that they give us reason to respect and dignify others. But sometimes it becomes excessive as well. That we like when we find people who are very sharp in their intellect. I like it when we find people that they are very agile. We like it when people themselves are very elegant in their dress and their look. Right? We like people who look strong. Right? We like those things. And so we have to be very careful and understand that Shaitan, his trick throughout history has been to transform the nature of idolatry, to give it in a different form. And this is why we find the hadith of the Prophet that the thing that I fear for you the most is subtle idolatry. And in one narration, he asked al-riyah, the minor idolatry, in which is ostentation. But idolatry is something even more than that. So Nuh alayhi salam, he mentions this, that this is their response. But Noah, prior to this in that surah, he tries to give them something else to reflect upon. If you worship dead things, I'll give you something else to reflect upon. أَلَمْ تَرَوْا كَيْفَ خَلَقَ اللَّهُ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ طِبَاقًا. Have you not observed how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has created 7 heavens, level upon level. That is how it usually is translated, 7 heavens. But the early people, for them, the heavens, they didn't think of them in the same way that we do today. Because Muslims, you hear them say, well, this heaven that we see is the lowest heaven. But for the early peoples, it was different. They thought of heavens as the 7 orbits. So people from prehistoric times, right? Of course, we're reflecting upon our existence, reflecting upon the things around us. We're observing those things that happen around us. And so very early in our history, people could see, well, one orbit would be the moon, right? The orbit of the moon, Venus, Mercury, Sun. The Sun is in orbit. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Right? Those were the 7 heavens for them. Because they can observe the movements of these things and they notice that they're moving in a similar direction and they're not like the other stars, الثوابت, السيارات, those which are firmly established in the sky. So have you not looked and observed this? أَلَمْ تَرَوْا كَيْفَ خَلَقَ اللَّهُ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ طِبَاقًا وَخَلَقَ فِيهِنَّ نُورًا وَجَعَلَ الْقَمَرَ فِيهِنَّ نُورًا. And he made the moon therein a light. وَجَعَلَ الشَّمْسَ سِرَاجًا. And he made the sun a lamp. وَاللَّهُ أَنْبَتَكُم مِّنَ الْأَرْضِ نَبَاتًا. And Allah, He caused you to grow out of the earth like a plant. As if in reference to Adam alayhi salam was created from the earth. ثُمَّ يَعِيدُكُمْ فِيهَا. And then He will return you therein. وَيُخْرِجُكُمْ إِخْرَاجًا. And He will bring you out of it once again. Right in the future, Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَاللَّهُ جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ بِسَاطًا لِتَسْلُكُوا مِنْهَا سُبُلًا فِجَاجًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made the earth for you as a firmament, as if a spread or a rug. لِتَسْلُكُوا مِنْهَا سُبُلًا فِجَاجًا. So that you yourself can find your way there in the mountain paths. And so here, He tried to give them something else to think about. So you think these things are so great, what about these things? Turn their attention to something else. But later on, of course, after century, Noah had felt that there was nothing more he could do. And so we find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He quotes Noah, and it's after saying, مِمَّا خَطِيئَاتِهِمْ أُغْرِقُوا. And from their many sins, they were drowned. فَأُدْخِلُوا نَارًا. And then they were entered into a fire thereafter. فَلَمْ يَجِدُوا لَهُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنصَارًا. So they have not found, and they didn't find anyone to help them other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Nuh alayhi salam says, قَالَ نُوحَ رَبِّي لَا تَذَرْ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ دَيَّارًا. Noah said, Lord, do not leave a single rejecter of faith on the earth. Why? إِنَّكَ إِن تَذَرْهُمْ يُضِلُّوا عِبَادَكَ وَلَا يَجِدُوا إِلَّا فَاجِرًا كَفَارًا. Why? Because if you do so, if you leave them, the only thing that will happen is that they will misguide your servants, and they will give birth to wicked, ungrateful people. Ungrateful for what? For all of the blessings that have been counted in your favor from you, that you have given them, right? And so Nuh alayhi salam, this is a dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He answered that prayer. He answered that prayer. Now, of course, living today and the sort of confusion at times we as Muslims feel about this whole idea of whether or not I should feel a certain way about non-Muslims or rejectors of faith, or that we should take a position. We should never say someone's a kafir or someone's in the hellfire. We understand that at the root of kufr is ingratitude. And so it can apply to almost any one of us. But at the same time, too, that the greatest form of ingratitude is the rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? To not to acknowledge your benefactor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so beginning there, it leads to many great types of confusions. So we have societies. We call the stars, right? That some people, movie stars. We have other types of superstars, right? That in itself is a direct reflection of this whole idea of those people who would even worship the stars. Because Nuh was calling them to that, not for them to worship the stars, but for them to reflect upon the creator of the stars. Right? And so here, Nuh is trying to give us something to celebrate as well. And that celebration is Iman itself. That we celebrate faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not to say that, okay, if you have faith and another person doesn't have it, that you are automatically better than they are, simply because of your faith and their lack thereof. Because you can be a wicked person, even though you may claim to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know that. However, if we would imagine that you were a virtuous person and this non-Muslim was a virtuous person, and you believe in the other person rejected faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're better than that person with Allah. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is something for us to value. Iman is something that we value. لا تذر على الأرض من الكافرين ديارا إنك إن تذرهم يضلوا عبادك ولا يلدوا إلا فاجرا كفارا رب اغفر لي ولوالدي. My Lord, forgive me and my parents. وَلِمَنْ دَخَلَ بَيْتِيَ مُؤْمِنًا. And anyone who enters into my home as a believer. وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَمُؤْمِنَاتٍ. Also forgive the believers, male and female. So it's Nuh alayhi salam, from way back, he's making dua for us. Alayhi salam. وَلَا تَزِدَ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا تَبَارًا. But the wrongdoers, the oppressors, increase them only in ruin. Increase them in ruin for those people who reject and oppress and are unjust. And it's a very just prayer that's made by Nuh alayhi salam. So there's some things for us to reflect upon. And when we look at this particular story. But more important is that we have to ask ourselves, what are the idols today? Where are they? And what are those idols that need to be smashed? And so, as Muslims, we know we don't bow down to idols, physical idols. But in our hearts, we may do that as well. And there's not enough time to really go into detail about that. But I sort of alluded to this in the last khutbah about just simply the whole idea of what we call white supremacy. And how when we look at, for instance, the movie Noah, and our only objection to it is because this is a man who is playing the role of a prophet. And that's the only critique that we have of it, without the other critiques, which are critiques which is a critique which would legitimately help us to unravel some of the things in our hearts that hinder us from being able to truly take in the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that when we start to place people almost at a level of a god, a demigods, right? That certain people, they set the standards. Certain people are the ones whose judgment really means anything about us. And there are other people we can care less what their judgments are about us. And when I speak of this issue, that I'm not talking about, again, just simply the whole idea of, okay, a bunch of skinheads coming in and, waving a Nazi flag or Confederate flag. That in itself is an easy scapegoat for the system itself. But it's to say that the system, when we look at it, that it is set up in such a way that it maintains a certain type of domination for a certain type of individual. That when we look in the economic sector, we look at the faces of those people in that sector. We look at the military command, we face the same type of faces. We look in the politics, in Congress, in the Senate, right, and in the House of Representatives. What does the faces of those people look like? Right? And I'm not saying that there's something necessarily wrong with that. Because every society is going to have their particular group of people who represent a particular, a sort of tribal population that in some regards, they are sort of the glue that keeps society together because of their organization, right? But the idea is that any group of people have to be fair and just people. That when we start talking about the issue of egalitarian existence, that it can't have an egalitarian existence if we give a voice to a large population of people, a percentage of people, and then the rest of them, we're just tokens, right? You throw a couple of colored faces in there, there's okay, well, we have equality. No, we don't. Doesn't make up for what things have been in the past, or even still in the present. So what things reflect upon is that how do those images affect our psyche? How do those images make us question whether or not we should be truly aiming to emulate the Prophet ﷺ as opposed to these other individuals? Do we truly care about the Prophet's judgment, or do we care about these other people's judgment in society? And so Muslims have to eventually, just like American society in general and Western society overall, has to have this conversation. And I understand why people are uneasy about those type of conversations, because often when people open up these conversations, they don't become very productive. That there's always attacks against this one, and some people sort of get isolated and put in the red seat, right, so to speak, and we start to attack, but it's not a productive type of conversation. We have to find a way to create an atmosphere where people can sit around and openly express their views about how I perceive of you and what I understand of your existence, right, and how can I rectify that without feeling that they're going to be judged or they're going to be punished for doing so. Because people have many thoughts. Right? People have many thoughts. So how do we create that atmosphere? That's really just the question. But the conversation has to be had, because without having a conversation, we won't really be able to realize true tawheed in our lives. We won't be able to do so, in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do, because Islam is not just about the private realm. That's not what Islam's all about. It's not only about the private realm. You say, I just deal with kibr. I'll just deal with my pride, and because racism that's all it's about is just arrogance anyway. So I'll just deal with arrogance. Get rid of that, and you'll have to really gonna be racist. No, it's not just as simple as that. When you're dealing with hundreds of years of indoctrination into this idea that certain people are superior, and certain people that they are the final judges and the standard bearers, those who create the standards of all different things, and then yourself, you live your lives in such a way where your decisions are influenced by those particular cognitive frames. That is important for us to understand how we've been constructed. Even our ideas about race. Is it real? Or is it simply a social construct? There are hierarchies even in whiteness as well. Because when people talk about whites, right? There are hierarchies there. There are constructs. There's a history that goes with it, you see. And all those things have to be taught. They have to be learned. But again, I bring this again just in the connection with this conversation, and sometimes these sort of debates that we have, theological debates about legal issues. Is it okay to present or represent a prophet in a movie, right? But there are other issues as well. How these sort of social issues, psychological, emotional issues, right? Those are important as well. That this movie is historically accurate in terms of the way that it represents the people who lived during those times. We have to ask those questions, you see. And so, because when you look at it, as I mentioned before, you think that the only people who lived or on the planet at the time were people from Europe, right? And so, amongst that, again, you find similar to that movies like The Message as well. But at any rate, I know that we all have the rest of our days. I don't want to keep you here forever. However, I do think that this is an important message to convey, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He unify our hearts and help us to be people who work to form true and sincere brotherhood and sisterhood. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Before closing, I'd like to just mention that our brother Dustin Cron, as some of us know, he's went away to see his mother. His mother's sick, and we got some news a little while ago that her cancer has metastasized. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grant comfort to Dustin and to his mother. Then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He make this particular trial for all of them an easy trial. As some of you know as well, that recently I lost my mother, and a couple years ago I lost my father. All of us are waiting for the same thing. The way that things are going in the world, you don't know how much time we have, not necessarily before death, but before the judgment. We would do well to work our hardest, inshallah, to rectify our hearts and to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only as individuals, but in the private realm, but in the public realm as well. So we ask Allah that He bring a cure and comfort and consolation to that family and to our brother, inshallah. أذهب بأس رب الناس اشفي أنت الشافي فإنه لا شفاء إلا شفاءك شفاء لا يغادر سقما إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين اللهم إنا نسألك الجنة وما يقرب إليها من قول وعمل ونعوذ بك من النار وما يقرب إليها من قول وعمل اللهم إنا نسألك من كل خير سأله منك محمد نبيك ونعوذ بك من كل شر استعاذك منه محمد نبيك اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معصيتك ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا بها جنتك ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا ومتعنا بأسمائنا وأبصارنا وقوتنا ما أحييتنا واجعله الوارث منا واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا وانصرنا على من عادانا ولا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يخافك فينا ولا يرحمنا ولا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يخافك فينا ولا يرحمنا اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا دينا إلا قضيته ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة إلا قضيتها يا أرحم الراحمين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الأخيار وسلم تسليما كثيرا وسبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد